What's going on, y'all? KM Best here. This patch is crazy and has nerfs to some of the most hated cards in the history of Marvel Snap. Alioth, formerly a 6-2 that destroyed unrevealed cards on your opponent's side of the field, is going to 6-8. At 6-8, this is a card that I have a lot of questions about. I really do not know exactly where this card fits in. The comparison I would draw between old Alioth and new Alioth is similar to old Leech and new Leech, where Leech went from being a card that was fairly often played to the higher specificity of its requirements, making it a little bit harder to actually get into any deck pretty much ever right now. And I worry that might happen to Alioth, although I realize as I say that, a lot of people who are like, you worry that might happen to Alioth? I'm just glad he's gone, and I think that's fair. Alioth was a card that was consistently like a pretty high play rate, a pretty reasonable win rate, and a card people pretty consistently complained about, more so than other cards with similarly high play rates and win rates. And I think that that is a reasonable consideration to take into account when you are, doing game dev, is do you have a card that is everywhere that literally everyone hates? This is not like a Shang-Chi thing where like people are split on Alioth, where it's like there's these teams of people who think, Shang-Chi is fine, Shang-Chi makes the game better, or everyone, I hate Shang-Chi. This is not the same as that. I think even the people that think Alioth is fine still don't really like him that much. Like, I think it's a lot more fun to play the I'm going to invalidate your lane playstyle with a big guy with a big number on it like Red Hulk than it is to do it with, everyone's favorite purple fart cloud. I personally think that this version of Alioth at 6-8 is a little bit awkward. I am not entirely sure exactly how you want to approach playing this card, specifically because of Red Hulk. Because right now, the competition this card has in its role, and its role is card that invalidates what your opponent is doing, right? Like, that's what its job is. That's the whole point of it. I think I'd probably rather just play something twice as big. Now, I do think that, this maintains the ability to, I have a big guy out and I'm going to play Alioth in the Shang-Chi lane and I baited it all out, things like that. But there is some, what if your opponent just plays a Red Hulk, right? What if your opponent's just like, haha, I'm going to play a Red Hulk. It's a very large man. What if your opponent just, plays a Magneto? It's like, it doesn't need to pull stuff to need 12 power, And you end up in these spots where it's probably more likely that if you are looking to win one lane, you're going to want to play Red Hulk, right? You're going to want to play Red Hulk or Blob or something just prohibitively large. And I think that speaks to the role Alioth had, because Alioth had a dual role effectively in Marvel Snap, where it was a card that was half Red Hulk and half tech. And I think that is something that is underappreciated about why the card was consistently good. The card half the time was, I am going to win this lane. I win this lane. There's nothing you can do about it. This is my lane. I take it. The other half the time, it's like, oh, you're playing Living Tribunal? Nice. Or, oh, you're playing Hela? Nice. There's stuff like that in there, too, where you're just like, okay. And Alioth has a utility there where something like a big Red Hulk doesn't. And so I think, this is not necessarily a buff to those kinds of decks necessarily. Just the fact that Alioth was ubiquitous was sort of knocking them down a little bit of a peg. I do think that Alioth was also helping some of those decks. It was in Phoenix Force. I've seen it in Destroy. It kind of went a lot of different places. I would say this change is mostly a wash. Most of the decks that were playing it can replace it with something fairly large, and that's totally fine. And the rest are, it'll be fine, I think. But I do think that the fact that there is no longer something pulling double duty that's half Red Hulk, win a lane, half tech card against these combo decks, that could end up mattering. I don't think it was doing a particularly good job of that anyway, though. And I think everyone kind of hated dealing with this thing, and that is probably a good reason to at least explore other shapes for the card. Zabu is finally gone, and this comes at a weird time. I'm going to be completely honest with you, because to me, this nerf would have been warranted at basically any other time in the history of Marvel Snap since Zabu came out, and it didn't happen then, and it happening now, I feel like it's just a very unfortunate coincidence, because Zabu decks have been the default mid-range decks. The default, I'm going to play a sort of normal game of Marvel Snap with some tech cards and some power, and that's like, they sort of set the tone for what mid-range is, really. And you know what? That's not true anymore. Now those decks are Hope Summers decks. They're Angela decks, they're Elsa Bloodstone decks, they're Kitty Pryde decks. That's what the mid-range decks are being right now. And Zabu has never been worse, I think, than he is right now. I wouldn't be shocked if he had like some reasonable play rates or win rates, but it's like he's not the dominant strategy in the mid-range form right now. And so seeing this is like, you know, I wish you'd done this at any other time than right now. I think right now, actually, you could argue those archetypes need help more than they need anything else. But here's the argument for nerfing Zabu as I see it. Here's what I would do about Zabu, and I get why they would have to do this, right? Zabu is not necessarily patient zero of the gap between 3 costs and 4 costs, but he is a very important problem in that context. Zabu exacerbates those problems and to some extent causes new ones. The gap between 3s and 4s is massive. We've seen people talking about power creep with people releasing 3/5 with upside, right? And meanwhile, there's like, you know, multiple 4/10s that you can build around and turn into upside. Sentry, Cull Obsidian, things like that. There's multiple cards like that. They're just like, oh, a 4/10. For 1 extra energy, you get double the power. And I think that that is not necessarily Zabu's fault. That's just a general gap between 3s and 4s. But what Zabu did was exacerbate it to the point that it was almost impossible to play like reasonable 3s. The issue, though, is we're finally in a metagame where they made 3s that were actually good. Elsa Bloodstone, Hope Summers, these are the keys to a lot of mid-range decks right now. And now the gap between 3s and 4s is a little bit smaller. And Zabu is no longer causing those problems because the decks that those 3s go in are good into his decks. And now they nerf him. And so it's just like, you know, I really wish this had happened earlier. I get why it had to happen just to see what the curve looks like without Zabu. But I do wish this had happened earlier. And yes, for the record, I do think, you know, it's fairly likely this Zabu ends up pretty unplayable. You can't play it in Tribunal anymore. You end up in a lot of weird scenarios and a lot of sad boy things are happening for you right now. And it's just like, oh my God, really? Do we really have to deal with this? Like, it's like, man, I feel like if you were a Zabu lover, you were already taking so many shots on the chin that this just kind of feels like, you know, insult to injury. I think a lot of Zabu lovers have moved on, probably, but this does sort of feel like, oh, geez, that is a, I don't think they needed the extra hit on the chin. I think Zabu decks were already in trouble. I do understand why they did it, but oof. Here's another really interesting one. Sandman to 5/7, I think actually strikes me as a nerf to the card. And you're going to be like, what are you talking about, KM? How is that possibly a nerf to the card? Well, look at every deck that Sandman is played in. Every deck Sandman is played in is, maybe not a nerf. Let's talk about it, though. Every deck Sandman is played in currently relies on having his effect for 2 turns. You are going to Electro or Corvus Glaive into Sandman, keep your opponent locked down on the final turns of the game, and do something better than what they do. The classic curve, Electro, Sandman, Doom, Odin. Classic, right? I mean, like, the more realistic version is like, you know, Corvus, Sandman, Doom, Hela, right? Like, that's what it looks like now. But that is a consequence of the metagame pushing you further and further towards you actually needing more power on those Sandman turns. I don't think those decks can play this Sandman. I don't think those decks want to play this Sandman. Yes, it has 3 extra power, but you don't get to lock them down on one of the final turns of the game. And I think the whole point of Sandman is the deal you're making is, yes, I'm sacrificing here, but I'm going to get it back on the back end because of this. Now, what this turns Sandman into is a more general tech card. This is no longer, I'm going to build a Sandman deck in order to combat the meta. This is, I'm going to put Sandman in my deck in order to see what if I can beat something that is exploding a bunch of power on the final turn of the game. That's what's going on here. This is now a tech card. I think that's like really important to grasp about Sandman, and not in the same way that the previous Sandman was. Previous Sandman was not a card that you would just slap in your deck to deal with stuff. It was a card that you would build around very, very, very specifically. There were very specific things that you would do. The deck itself was a tech deck in the sense that it was a deck that was built to beat specific things, but that was referring to the deck, right? Sandman now is a tech card. It is a card you can put in other decks that can support it in order to beat decks that can't support it. And I think that distinction is meaningful. However, Sandman at 5/7 is just like, that's all just kind of scary, right? Like, I don't know, that's like really scary. One thing that scares me a lot about this, like a lot about this, is I kind of wonder if you can just put it in just like straight up Hella, right? Like, that seems like super duper scary, is just putting this in normal Hella, where you're just like, ramping. Now you have this card. It's an actual body. You don't even really care if you discard it. If you discard it, that's dope. You can also just play it on 5, Hella on 6, and that's also dope. I think that's the thing that sticks out to me about this is like, boy, I really hope that is not a thing that happens, because that deck's already pretty miserable, and it's about to be like a lot more miserable if this actually does pay off. Lady Deathstrike getting a pretty significant change. I'm not sure how to call it a buff or not. I think it is a buff. Going to 5/7 and removing the fact that her power is tied to her ability. Now, as a 5/7, she just destroys things with 3 or less power here, and that makes her like a pretty powerful nuke. I mean, like, note the cards that she'll blow up. She'll blow up an Elsa Bloodstone. She'll blow up a Mobius M. Mobius. She will very often deal with a lot of reasonable stuff. I think this could be a really good card, but the issue I think you'll run into is a lack of flexibility. This is a card that strikes me as something that is powerful but inflexible, and being powerful but inflexible has worked for cards before. I think Alioth would be a great example. I think Red Hulk is a great example, but typically those are 6 drops. Powerful but inflexible is 6, and we've talked a lot about the differences between, 3s and 4s on this channel, but I don't know how much we've talked about 4s and 5s. I think most 4s are better than most 5s right now, and it's hard to actually justify playing a 5 like this, right? Like when you compare this to, say, Sentry Annihilus, one of those things is better than the other. Now, that said, this has a lot of like interesting hidden utility. This is going to blow up a lot of stuff on a Loki board. Like your Elsa is gone, most stuff is gone there, right? This is going to blow up a lot of stuff against any mid-range deck. Here's the thing. I'm not worried about mid-range decks right now. Spoilers for tomorrow's video. I'm worried about combo decks. I'm worried about those. The combo decks are the things I'm scared of right now. I'm scared of Hela. I'm scared of Tribunal to some degree. Zabu Nerf does hurt that. I'm scared of Phoenix Force, and I don't know that Lady Deathstrike's doing much about that. I think in another metagame we could be talking about that, but like the decks I'm the most scared of here, they're playing combo. They're not playing mid-range. The mid-range stuff is the stuff with a target on its back. The combo decks are targeting it very effectively, and this is just another way to target those mid-range decks. My boy Strong Guy is back in the metagame. I'm extremely happy to have another buff to my namesake character, Strong Guy. He is going to get effectively the Heck Bent condition. We're taking some terminology from Magic. Cards that trigger when your hand is empty are called Hell Bent there. Cards that trigger when you have one card in your hand, Heck Bent, right? So that is what Strong Guy is doing. And I think that's a really good change, because one of the major issues Strong Guy had as an early game player, early pool player, was, I can't play this with Apocalypse, and Apocalypse is the thing every discard deck is built around. Now you can play this with Apocalypse. This is just a 3/9 that goes in the discard deck now. And I think that is just awesome. Like, the fact that you are able to play this card with Apocalypse is such a big deal. I also think that this is a reasonable buff to, like, the Dracula Zoo stuff, which is very often like, I've got 2 big guys in my hand. I can't get rid of both of them, but now I can get rid of one, and I'll end up with 1 card in my hand. This is just a 3/9. I think Strong Guy's actually good now. I know I'm biased, right? But I think this is a genuinely powerful 3-cost card now. He is effectively a 3/9. That's just a lot of power. A 3/9 is bigger than Gladiator. It's like that's just a big guy. There's not a lot of cards that are going to be that much bigger than this. And I think that really speaks to the way in which they've been rebalancing 3s. This is another one of those cases where this is a 3 that is close in power to the 4s in a way that is meaningful. It's a really good upside. And I think this is a good way for them to go moving forward. I'm not sure how much of a big deal this is going to be exactly at the top end of ladder, but I do think specifically in the early game, early pools, like when you're climbing up through those collection levels, Strong Guy just became a much better card. This card is not only a card you can play in discard, it's a card you can play in any deck where you're reasonably emptying your hand a lot. That's really important. Being able to just hand dump is a thing a lot of decks can do. Zoo can do that very easily. A lot of points decks can do that very easily. Sarah decks can do that very easily. Getting stuff out of your hand is not just discarding, it's also just playing cards. I even wonder if this can fit into something like Silver Surfer, when you have like Sarah and Hope, all these multiple ways to generate energy. I think this being changed in the midst of like a Hope metagame is really interesting too. The one risk I feel like you'll have with a card like this, however, is this is a card that is very much not a combo card. It's not going over the top. It's just good numbers for good rate, right? And that means that you're in a lot of situations with decks that play this card where you are at the mercy of, say, Hela or Phoenix Force. And those are, like, I think two of the strongest decks in the metagame. But I worry that cards like this, cards like Lady Deathstrike, might not get the chance to shine because of the general construction of the metagame. There is one more thing in this patch that I found in the patch notes that I think is incredibly important. They fixed the undo end turn bug. Now, for those who are unaware, the undo end turn bug was when your opponent snapped, you could no longer undo your end turn, which is, in my opinion, I won't use the word inexcusable, but the whole point of the functionality was so that when your opponent snapped, you would be able to undo your end turn, and so you could think about it more. That specific play, the like late rope snap, was what undo end turn was meant to alleviate in like a very specific way. And the fact that it like there was a bug that prevented that from working where you just like couldn't retreat is one of the things that made me really dislike how they rolled it out. Like, it feels like, all right, this is the specific problem that it's trying to fix. I have no idea why it doesn't fix that. Why would that not be like a thing that works? And it just wasn't a thing that works. Now, with undo and turn actually fixed, I think that I can finally say that is a very good quality of life update. I'm very happy for them. You know, I like that's something that like I really, really wanted to happen. Of course, you know, I'm just reading the patch notes. I mean, maybe they didn't fix it, but it is in the patch notes. And, you know, hypothetically, if it does work, I'm very happy for them, you know? I'm very happy for me because I definitely, it's probably my number one complaint topic about something that isn't in the game or like monetization related, where it's just like, I have no idea why this entered the game without solving that issue. I'm very glad that now when my opponent snaps, I can actually undo my end turn and think about it instead of having to sit here and panic think for 10 to 15 seconds and knowing that if I stayed, I'd be locked in there. Again, one of the worst parts of the game, should have been alleviated a patch ago, is alleviated now. I'm very happy that they made that change. All right, y'all, thank you so much for making it through this video. I know it was late today. There was a miscommunication with getting this video out, basically. There's just some stuff going on behind the scenes. I apologize for that. Please do bear with me. It would mean a ton to me if you liked, subscribed, left a comment on this, because I know uploading a patch notes video late is hard for my algorithm to deal with, and I really, really want to be able to still do this. I actually asked my Discord, like, is it too late for me to make this? They told me, you know, no, I still want to hear your opinion. I really hope that remains true. So please, if you did enjoy this video, like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that stuff. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so, so much for watching. As always, I've been Cam Best. I will see you in the next one.